Hi everyone, welcome to Tanya and Tiana English. Today we have some everyday English phrases that we just heard recently. These are phrases that we've heard people say or use in conversation in the recent past, so in just the last few days. And we're going to do things just a little differently, so stick with me. So Tiana and I are filming this video a little differently than we usually do. I'm here in my home near Phoenix, Arizona, and she's away at the university. So we are unable to get together to film the video, but we wanted to do something together. So we're trying a little bit of a different editing technique. So be sure and let us know in the comments below how you liked the way this video was filmed. And let's get into our topic for today. So I have a few phrases that I've picked out from conversations I've had recently. These are things that might not be easy to understand if you're not a native speaker. Some of them are phrases that you will hear all of the time. You'll hear them used very often. And some of them are not used as often, but you need to understand them if you're going to understand English speakers. So, my first phrase is the lion's share. The lion's share. We use this phrase when we mean that we are getting a lot of something or the most of something. I heard this in a conversation with a friend who was talking about an argument that she had with someone else. And what she said is, I think that I got the lion's share of the blame. And what she meant was, I think that we were arguing, we disagreed with each other, and the other person blamed me more than maybe I should have been blamed. So you could also use this in a more literal sense when you're splitting something up physically. So for instance, maybe you're sharing food with someone and you're gonna split the food up, and you could say, oh, I think I got the bigger half, or I think I got the lion's share. In other words, I think I got more food than you did.
Hi everyone! So I have a few phrases to share with you today too. The first phrase is, it grosses me out. Now this phrase kind of means like, oh, like that's disgusting, like really gross. So, for example, yesterday my roommate and I were taking out the trash and it did not smell so great. So you could say, oh, it grossed me out. Or if a movie grossed you out, then maybe something really gross happened. Maybe it was violent or, something bad happened. You could say, oh, that kind of grossed me out. So the second phrase, this is kind of like that. It's very similar actually, is it freaks me out. So it freaks me out is a little bit, I found out it's kind of hard to describe. We use it a lot, and we use it for different things. Most often we use it to mean like it's surprising, or I just don't like it. So someone might be shopping and they say, here, look at this shirt. They said, oh, I don't know, that pattern kind of freaks me out. Or maybe it's like a back to the movie example. Maybe if there's something kind of scary, then it could freak you out a little bit.
My next example is to beat a dead horse. To beat a dead horse. This one sounds kind of gross. It is kind of gross, and it's actually more common than the last one I talked about. You'll hear this when somebody is talking about something that has been said over and over again. So in this context, I was talking to someone who was talking about their child, and they were making a suggestion to their child. So, for instance, they might say, I think it would be a good idea for you to try this new thing. And maybe the child doesn't want to do it, and the parent keeps saying the same thing. I really think you should try this. I think it would be a good idea. I think that you would get a lot of good out of this. And then finally the parent said, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I really want my child to have this good experience. So, in other words, what they meant was, I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over if my child is not going to do it. Just like it doesn't matter what you do, a dead horse is not going to get up and walk. It's something like that. So you'll hear this in conversation. If you listen, I'm sure you'll hear this one in movies or television shows.
So, my next phrase for you guys is stay out of it, which can be said in a bunch of different ways. Usually it's kind of negative. And it just means to mind your own business. Stop meddling in other people's lives. So when someone says to stay out of it, you mean to stop like affiliating yourself with whatever they're doing.
My next example is on the down low. On the down low. This is a phrase we use when we're saying we're going to do something without telling other people, or maybe we don't want to get found out. So we might say, I'm going to change the way I do that. I'm going to do it on the down low. In other words, I'm not going to tell anyone that I'm going to change what I'm doing. And sometimes you'll hear people talk about it in kind of a joking way. For instance, if you have not seen a friend of yours in a long time, and maybe you changed something, maybe you changed where you are living, or maybe you changed something smaller like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. I don't know, it could be anything. And the other person might kind of jokingly say, oh, so you're doing that on the down low. In other words, they didn't know you were doing it, so they're kind of teasing you that you didn't tell them, that maybe you should call them more often and tell them what you're doing.
So next we have it's on the house, which basically just means it's free. Yay! So if, for example, if you're at a restaurant and they make something that you don't like, or maybe, for example, this happens often with steak. They overcook it and then they have to redo it if you don't like it. Then they might bring out something else. Maybe it's the steak, or maybe they bring a dessert or something, and they might say, don't worry, it's on the house, meaning the restaurant will pay for it. It's free. So that's always fun.
Another English phrase that I heard just recently is pigeonholed. Pigeonholed. Now, it's just a coincidence that all of the ones that I have heard recently have something to do with animals. What I mean by coincidence is I didn't plan it that way. It just happened that way. But this one means anything really that's small. So a pigeon is a bird. It's not a particularly small bird, but it's not a big bird either. And the context I heard this phrase was in someone who was talking about what they do for work, what they do for a living. And they said, I really like the work that I do, but I don't want to get pigeonholed. And what they meant was, even though I really like what I do, I don't want to have to do only this. I'd like to do a variety of things. I don't want to do just this small thing. I want to do more things. And so this is a really common way to use this phrase. You could also hear it when someone is referring to a very small physical thing. For instance, I feel like I live in a pigeonhole. In other words, a very small space. That's not as common in my experience, but it is something you might hear. And like all of these phrases, it's the kind of thing that even if you don't use this phrase when you're speaking English, you're going to want to understand what it means because you will hear other people use these phrases.
So this phrase is interesting because it was inspired by a Snapchat video that I saw. In this video, there was a guy who stacked up a bunch of boxes and he tried to jump over them. He didn't do it and he actually fell over because the boxes were almost as tall as he was, actually probably taller. And the saying that I thought of was he set the bar too high. Now, for the Snapchat video, we mean that literally. Like, he actually set it too high and he couldn't jump over it. But most of the time, we say this figuratively, meaning we don't actually mean that they had a bar and they set it really high. We usually mean that our expectations are too high and we can't meet them.
A very common English phrase that you will definitely hear is nitty-gritty. Nitty-gritty. The context I heard this phrase most recently was when somebody was talking and said, okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. And what they meant was, let's talk about the thing we really need to talk about, or let's talk about what's most important here. Let's keep this simple and talk about the small thing we need to talk about instead of everything we could talk about. This is really similar to a phrase that I talked about in another video, the nuts and bolts of things. You might hear the phrase, let's talk about the nuts and bolts. And that video, I'll put a link to that video here and you can check that out, or maybe it's going to be over there. It's a little circle with an I in it. Click on that circle for that video. So these are some great phrases that we've shared with you today. You're definitely going to hear these phrases when you're practicing your listening, but you're also going to want to work on using these phrases in your everyday English. So it's your turn to practice. Go back and pick one or two of these phrases that you could use and put them in the comments below. See if you can form a sentence using one of these phrases. And be sure that you like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that little bell and you'll get notices whenever we have new English to share with you. All right, I hope this video was helpful for you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.